Hey, thanks so much for listening to the Ridge Community Church podcast. My name is John. I'm one of the pastors at the Ridge, and our vision is to bring the hope of Jesus into every home. So we want to bring you something hopeful and helpful for your everyday life, whether you've been following Jesus for a while or you're still trying to figure out exactly what you do believe about God. Now, you'll find on this podcast things that'll help with conversations about marriage and parenting and mental health and work, practical things to help you in your faith journey, and a lot more. So whether you're listening to this on your favorite podcast app or you're watching on YouTube, be sure to follow and subscribe so that you don't miss any of the hopeful and helpful conversations. Hey everyone, thanks for listening to this episode of the Ridge Podcast. I'm excited to share a conversation that I got to have with Tim and Kelly Ager about the little bit of a challenging topic in what do you do when you're angry with God? And they both offer some similar aspects of their story, but also a little bit of a different perspective as well. 11 years ago, their youngest son, Lincoln, was diagnosed with a brain tumor. And Tim and Kelly both talk about how they react to that news and the emotions responding with that. Even though Lincoln is able to have a full recovery, still processing through all of those things. And then recently in October, Kelly suffered a heart attack and processing through her own emotions of facing that challenge and her own emotions towards God. So it gives a little bit of both perspectives of what happens when someone close to you features something really challenging and difficult, and what happens if you yourself face that. How do you respond? How do you be honest with God and process through those things? It's a really great conversation. I hope you gain a lot from it. This is my conversation with Tim and Kelly. Well, hey, Tim and Kelly, thanks for coming on to the Ridge Podcast. How are you guys doing today?
Doing good.
Well, yeah, thanks for having me.
Awesome. I know we are we're catching you guys at some fun different locations, right? So any spoilers? So if Kelly, there's some chaos going on behind you, we will not hold it against you. Maybe somebody tuning a piano going on in a conference center or something like that.
I moved from the conference center to remove that distraction, but I am outside and there's a bunch of people walking around, so I'm muting myself right now.
Yeah, if somebody comes by, they want to chat, and you're like, "Hey, guess what we're talking about?" Yeah, you feel free to get their opinions too. Well, hey, I know we're talking about this idea, and not to form a really hard right turn here, but we're talking about this idea today about what do you do when you're mad at God? And there's probably a lot of different emotions that go through that. Some people might even be like, wait, you can be, are you allowed to be mad at God? And we can dive into that later as well. But I know you both have shared some of your story on this, and there's been a few probably instances in your life, just knowing both your stories, that's been a real part of your faith journey. And I'm just curious, would you mind just sharing some of your story in terms of where you felt that the strongest? And it's possible that as we go through this, it may be that, it has showed up in different areas and different times. And I think that's a very realistic portrayal of what happens with relationships and marriages and things like that. So, yeah.
Well, I can start us up. So in October of 2012, our youngest son, Lincoln, was diagnosed with a brain tumor. And, at that moment when we heard the news, it was a series of emotions that we kind of ran through, sadness, question marks, concern, anger, confusion, and, we were newer, at least I was a newer Christian at that moment. And, I really struggled with the whys behind this. I tried my best to make sense of it. We did as a family, Kelly and I did. But, really what it came down to was, me personally, as Lincoln's father, questioning God, like, hey, why would something like this happen? Why would you allow something like this to happen to my son? And so there was a lot of anger, a lot of resentment. I was a good person. I felt like I was a good father. I felt like, I was doing the right things, and I felt like God was punishing, us as a family, punishing me as a father. And that was really hard. Like I said, it was a wrestling match, and it really took everything for me to get to a point where, I had to surrender it all to God. And, although I was so frustrated and so angry, I had to just at one point lay it up. I remember laying in bed with Lincoln, when he was real small, and I was just holding him and I was crying like, please don't, die. Please stay with us. Please, you know, fight, as hard as you can. And, at that moment, I just remember saying, hey, God, I can't yell, scream, be angry, cry anymore. I need you to carry this weight, this load for us, for me as the, spiritual leader of the family. And from that moment on, God really moved in my life and in the life of my families. So much so where, my faith was strengthened by this. God said, hey, I got this. I'll carry the load for you, no matter what happens. And I think at that moment, I found peace and resolution with no matter what happens, it's God's will, right? And that's, I think, that's really where I landed at the end of this whole thing was, if God needs to take Lincoln, then that's the way it's going to be, right? If God allows Lincoln to stay with us, then that's what it's going to be. It's going to be God's will, not my will, not Kelly's will, not, the doctors at Children's Hospital. It was just that he was going to dictate which way or the other. And so, again, went from frustration and anger to understanding, to surrendering fully and really leaning into God to say, we got this. And, we know that you're behind us 100%.
Was that something having these real, I think, raw, like almost like heartbreaking conversations with God and with lots of people, I'm sure. And I imagine people are trying to have conversations with you and encouraging you. Is that something where I'm thinking through the lens of the person who's just like trying to be encouraging to you, in that moment? I imagine there's really not much people can say to help beyond just being, I'm there for you. But coming to that realization, was that something that you just kind of had to do on your own? Was that something that like you had to talk to other parents who had gone through something similar about? What did that look like?
Yeah, with the initial diagnosis, we really felt like we were on an island by ourselves. We really felt like we were the only ones going through this at that moment. And no matter what somebody said, it wasn't helpful, right? It was like, well, you're not going through this. You don't understand, right? And that was kind of the initial response. And throughout all of this, by meeting with spiritual mentors and even folks within work, at my work and outside of work, I was able to really lean into some really great advice from folks, and at that point in time, I really started to appreciate this new environment that we were in, this new culture of care as it relates to childhood sickness, right? And that's when we really started to figure out that we're not the only ones on this planet that has this problem, that there's a lot of other folks that are going through similar experiences. And that's where we really started to create a network of support, friends, and really be able to be okay with those conversations of, hey, how's Lincoln doing? Or, how are you guys doing? That I think we, at some point, understood that, like I said, there were more people that were going through this and that it was okay to release some of that out on other folks that they wanted to listen, right? People are there and they want to be a part of your journey and your life. So definitely took some time, from the moment we heard to the end where we really felt like we could be advocates. And even today, throughout Lincoln's, life on earth, we've documented his cancer battle. We've started a nonprofit.
I'm actually
pouring
wearing
into
his shirt today.
My friend Lincoln, that's our nonprofit.
Shameless plug.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, we're able to pour into other kids and other families that are going through similar experiences. And that's really kind of how we've taken this process from the beginning, hearing this crazy news that our son's going through this life change event, to being able to support others that are going through events like this. And that's, I look at that, and that's all of God's plan, right? I look back, rewind time, and I'm like, God, why would something like this happen? But it was at that moment, the emotional, connection to what was going on with that cancer diagnosis. Fast forward, 10 years later, and now I see why God had us go through this, right? He opened up so many doors for us to connect with other families, and Lincoln was able to be a part of a lot of different experiences that he would have never otherwise been a part of. And he's very, active in the church. He loves God. He's on fire for God. And that's, I think has a lot to do with his life struggle going through this cancer diagnosis.
I know that Tim talked a lot about the diagnosis, and I'm sorry, FedEx showed up and the internet decided to drop off. And that time was incredibly difficult. But I'm not sure that I was mad at God during that time. I felt like I was holding on for dear life. But for me personally, I have a very different story. A few months ago, it was funny because when Tim mentioned October of 2014, October of 2024, 10 years later, almost like to the date, I have a massive heart attack, totally out of the blue. And that really rocked my world, where I wasn't prepared, was not prepared for it. Spiraled through depression and insomnia. And I didn't know how to talk about it. I felt frustrated and scared and honestly betrayed by God. I felt like it was a season of silence, and I hadn't felt that before, and I wasn't sure how to process it. And that probably is when I felt the angriest, or just the most distant from him.
Yeah. And
honestly, I'm still in it. I'm still learning how to process every bit of this, just bit by bit. And I'm grateful I'm not doing this alone. I have my husband and my family and an amazing therapist helping me walk through this. So having that space to just talk things out has been a huge help. And like I said, I'm still kind of in the middle of figuring out what faith looks like in all of it.
Yeah. What's been helpful for you? Because I think both of you kind of showcase two sides, right? Ultimately, something happens that you wish God wouldn't have let happen, right? Whether it's happening to someone you love or it's happening to yourself. There's kind of like two big sides of that. What's been helpful as you, even in the midst of it, processing through and going through that?
Yeah, I can jump in there. So, what's been helpful is community, right? Creating strong partnerships, even through the situation with Lincoln and the recent situation with Kelly. It was our church family, was constantly around us. So we were able to really, really leverage the community, not being afraid to have conversation, to talk about, what it is that we're going through, our challenges and our struggles. And, just consistent prayer, asking God for support, asking God for wisdom and help and confidence to get through to that next level. In so many ways, I feel like the situation that happened with Lincoln prepped me for situations that have happened since, right? I feel like I've been able to handle things a bit better because I have God on my side, whereas before maybe I was mad because I didn't have him as close as he is today, right? I feel like he's helped and empowered me throughout all of these situations. So, I think it's just keeping community close by, keeping your family close by. That's important, and really taking that time to talk to God, spend a little time reading his word, understanding what he's got planned for us.
Hmm.
I don't think I have anything more to add to that. That was perfectly well said.
Yeah, maybe we can dive in for a second on the community aspect. Has there been specific things that you feel like how your community has showed up that has been helpful for you? That you're like, yeah, if you see two sides of this, right? One, if you have a friend, someone in your community that's going through this, here's something you could do. Or two, how do you advocate for yourself where you're like, I have community, I know, but they may not know how to show up for me yet. How do I advocate to them on what you need?
Yeah, take action, right? That's what I say right away. It's nice to say, hey, how are you doing? I'm praying for you. That's great, but that's not action as far as hands and feet, right? Be there, be relevant, be present. So we had a lot of folks make food for us, and that seems simple, food, right? Everyone loves food. But during that time with Lincoln and during Kelly's recent heart attack, families just showed up and said, hey, we're going to take care of you. There wasn't an ask. There wasn't hey, we're thinking of doing this for you. Mobilization, man. People kicked into gear and just said, we're taking care of you for the next 2 or 3 weeks so that you can focus on your family and focus on your wife, with when she had the heart attack. And that's awesome. So I would say get involved, and really mobilize support for those around you. It's an easy way to help out. It's an easy way to be a part of someone's life in a tough time. Who doesn't like a meal, right? That's always a nice way to really connect with somebody and take the weight off of somebody else. I don't know what you think, Kel.
Yeah, recently we had a friend's husband in the hospital, and she had asked me to come over and watch her son, and that was the ask. Come over and watch him while I'm at the hospital. Easy enough, but while I was there, you look around and there's laundry that can be done and dishes that needed to be washed because she was spending all of her time at the hospital. And those weren't things that she asked me to do. And I kind of felt like I was invading some space and washing clothes. But at the end of the day, the towels got washed and her son's clothes got cleaned. And that was time that she didn't have to spend doing that when she got home at the end of the night after spending hours at the hospital talking with doctors, trying to fix her kid dinner, all of the things. Those were things that she didn't have to worry about. And so just take a look around. There are picking up toys, just little things that you don't even think about.
Yeah. Sounds like creating, how do you remove the stressors? As many external stressors in someone's life so that they can actually focus on either processing through what they're going through or just they can kind of devote their energy towards the things that need that energy. Is that fair?
Absolutely. I mean, when she came, she saw that the laundry was clean. She was like, oh my gosh, you didn't have to do that. And I said, I know I didn't have to, but I wish somebody would have done that for us. And so I kind of know what that felt like.
Yeah. You both have mentioned just talking to God, praying is a way of dealing with and processing through really the anger and you mentioned the sense, almost like a sense of betrayal. Did you ever feel guilty about being mad at God, or you had the wrong emotions, you weren't allowed to? Was that ever a part of your processing?
Yeah,
Great
absolutely.
question.
I think guilt comes with the territory. Yet in your head that God can handle all of the emotions, but in your heart, you're like, am I even allowed to feel this way? And I definitely
Mm.
wrestled with that guilt. I kept thinking I should be stronger than this. My mind should be stronger than this. I should have faith that's stronger than this. But what I learned and what I'm still learning is that God isn't intimidated by my anger or my disappointment. Um, Getting a little emotional just thinking about it. Um, he invites us to bring everything to him, even the messy stuff. Uh, and so for me, it was just processing that and just letting myself be honest with God, letting myself be honest with my husband, um, letting myself be honest with myself, and just realizing that it is okay. It is okay to be mad. Didn't mean that I was walking away from him. It just means that I am still in relationship with him and I care enough
Mm.
to wrestle through those things with him. Just like you would wrestle with a sibling. And at the end of that, you still love them. Um, that's kind of what I'm doing right now with God.
Mm.
Yeah, it's well put. I mean, that's, I feel the same exact way. There's definitely guilt, like you said, at the end of an argument, right? You feel like, maybe I shouldn't have said that. Maybe I should have, you know, maybe I just shouldn't have gone that right. Right. And so, yeah, I've felt that before. But like Kelly had said, God wants to hear that. He wants to hear the messiness. He wants to be talked to, right? He wants you to come to him with your concerns and have a real conversation with him. Not, it's not all rainbows and butterflies. It's the tough stuff, and he wants to hear the tough stuff. He can take all that on, and he has. I mean, he's done so much for us, coming and dying on the cross for us. I mean, he's taken on everyone's sin, and he can put up with the conflicts. He can put up with the frustrations. Doing it so in a way that's not demeaning, of course. But like I said, he wants to hear that. He wants to hear what's on your heart.
Well, I love what you said about it. It just like showcases that you care, right? Because you don't have, and I go back to the word like feeling betrayed. Like you don't feel betrayed by somebody you don't trust. You don't feel those strong emotions by someone that you don't care about. And I think being willing to fight and care, I think that showcases like that the relationship matters and is meaningful and is worth fighting for, and I think when like that processing out, I think showcases that. Yeah, he can handle it, but I also appreciate what you're saying, Tim, about also doing it in a way that's use it demeaning. I think, like, how do you, like, in the same way that you would, maybe be in a, yeah, I guess maybe what is that meant for you guys? That kind of concept of how do you be angry, but at the same time be angry or heartbroken in a way that feels helpful rather than hurtful.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, sharing your feelings, right, is just a way of opening up. And you don't have to be hurtful when you're sharing your feelings, right? You can be angry, but in a very easygoing, stern way, right? I mean, just the way in which we display that with our children, right? I mean, we have two teenage boys, and sometimes we have to raise our voices a bit, right? We want to get our points across. Sometimes we have to discipline. Sometimes we have to have strong conversation. But that doesn't mean we love them any less, right? And I think that's kind of the same notion of the conversations we have with God, where we can just be very open, vocal, but still tactful, and say, here's where I'm at, and here's where I am upset, and here's what's going on, and here's where I need you to come in. Here's where I need you to show me. And again, it's on his time, not ours. So we've learned so much over the years, and I think that's one thing that I've taken is that he'll present himself when and wherever. It's not at that moment that I'm praying. It's not at that moment that I'm upset. It might be years later. But I think just doing so in a tactful way is very necessary.
And I think that in the anger, it can get to a point where you may need forgiveness. And God shows his forgiveness towards anger by just inviting us in, right? He shows that with David and Job and the prophets. He never just rejects them for being honest. Instead, he meets them right where they're at. And if this is where you're at, that I just want to say it's okay. It's okay.
Tim, you had mentioned that it got to a point where you just had to surrender and you just had to trust. And I'm sure, I know, I've had those things said to me, right? Where someone says, hey, you just got to trust, you just got to surrender. And there are moments where it's like, yeah, I acknowledge that with my brain. Like you said, Kelly, like you know the answer. You know the answer in your mind, but having it actually matter in your heart or impact the way that you act can sometimes be different. How do you transition to that point? What advice would you give somebody who is trying to figure out how to move that theoretical head knowledge into something that's actually helps them get to that point?
Yeah, it's not, it's hard to just click your fingers and say, I surrender, right? And it is in practice. Sometimes it can just be an over run of emotions that helps you get through that allows you to do that. And that was what I had gone through with Lincoln. It was just an overabundance of emotion that allowed me to say, hey, I can't do this anymore. I need you, right? And I just felt that at that moment that I could give everything over to him. And then from then on, it really was purpose and intention and making sure that I lead a life that is surrendering to him, not just in this, but with everything else, whether that be the way I treat my family, my finances, the way I carry myself in my community. I look to God in all of those aspects. So it's a full change of self. It's not just, something that happens in a quick whim, right? So identifying that is number one, and that's crucial and critical. But in order to surrender, you can't just surrender one thing. You surrender your whole life, and everything goes with that. But once you do that, it's freeing and you feel that. And it's like anything else, exercising, you see the weight come off, or you're eating different. You feel it in your body. It's the same type of thing. It's a habit change. It's it's a change in lifestyle, and that takes time and it takes hard work. So keeping it in front of you at all times, I think, is critical, and praying about it and talking about it with others is essential.
For me, it wasn't just one big aha moment where it just it all clicked. It was just a lot of little things that kind of kept adding up. And honestly, it just all started with showing up, even when I didn't feel like showing up, going to church, being around people, listening to worship music, letting other people pray for me. That was hard. And even getting back into my own prayer rhythm was really hard. I just had to remind myself that God is still God, even when I don't feel like he's close. And honestly, the therapy, that really forced me to talk things out, even the stuff that I didn't want to admit that I was feeling. And saying those things out loud just helped me process what was actually going on inside. And it just gave me tools to work through instead of just stuffing it all in. And just over time, I just started to feel God's presence again, just a little by little. It wasn't, like I said, it wasn't just like it just happened. It was little bit by little bit, and I'm still working through that. There are days that I feel exhausted, but God's just like, I've got you. Don't worry.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a lot of moments where you don't necessarily fully feel like doing the thing that you know you should, but you do it anyway because you trust that it's going to work in some capacity. And I don't know if that's a hard thing to do. But I appreciate I just appreciate the honesty from both of you of being like, it's not all at once. It's not this magic switch. I love that we could tell people, yeah, just feel this way right away and then you'll be better. But instead this grind almost of being willing to go through the grind and the process and taking the next step after the next step after the next step. But I go back to like the care piece because that I think showcases that you care and that you believe what you said you believed. And how do you take steps and how do you work through it even when you don't feel that? And I imagine that's something that regardless of personal story or tragedy or whatever, that everybody can feel. And maybe we can wrap up on this. I know, Kelly, this may be a more challenging one just because you still kind of shared that you're still in the midst of that and it's day by day and it's growing. But how is this and being willing to embrace that journey and being willing to go through that grind and being willing to, experience and be honest with God and talk through the hardship and go through the anger. How has that impacted your view of him and really impacted your faith?
My view of God didn't change in the sense that I ever thought of following him meant that I wouldn't be protected from the hard things, right? I've always known, and the Bible's made it clear, that we're going to face hardship. But what shifted for me was how that became truth. It's one thing to know in your head and totally a different thing to walk through it yourself. So what's changed is my understanding of how God's presence, how he is present in the pain. I've experienced that firsthand, and I really, really know that he is close to the brokenhearted. It deepened my faith in a sense that I've learned that I can be completely honest with God, the anger, the sadness, the questioning, and he isn't going to pull away, that he stays over and over and over again. And it's grown my trust with him just on a much deeper level than I could ever realize. And I'm still getting there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and even it goes when it goes well, right? I mean, I think that's where we can celebrate, right? But even when it doesn't go well, those are the moments where we have to still trust in God, and we still have to come to him and say, hey, I understand you have reasons behind this, right? I mean, I remember saying, please don't take my son, please don't take my wife. I remember saying both those things, one at home and one in the hospital waiting for Kelly. And, we came out of those situations stronger, right? And we're all still here to tell the tale, which is beautiful. But, we've lost a lot of friends, and Lincoln's lost a lot of friends to cancer. A lot of the kids that we've written about in our books, have passed, and that's heartbreaking. That's sad, and so it doesn't always end in a happy ending, right? I think the happy ending is that we'll all be together at some point in time, right? In his presence in eternal life. And so I think you hold on to that a bit as well, that what happens on this earth isn't the end of the story, right? And so it's I think that's really helped my faith grow, is that, hey, we used to measure answered prayers in, happiness, right? And it doesn't always happen that way. And so just understanding that it's going to be a wrestling match at times, but just knowing that we're going to be with our friends and with him for eternity, that's what really gives me resolve, and it just makes me happy for the future.
Yeah, like that eternal perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. As we wrap up here, give you both open floor. You whether it's a parent with a kid in a similar situation, whether it's somebody that's facing that hardship themselves, or it's somebody that's just angry with God because of whatever their life situation is. What advice would you give them?
Boy, that it's okay to be angry. It's okay to be going through what you're going through. Life is very challenging. Life is very tough. Express that to God, right? That's that's number one. Let him know what you're struggling with. Let him know what you're going through, and he'll listen. And again, you might not see a response today or tomorrow, maybe 5 or 10 years from now, but he's listening and he cares and he loves you. And surround yourself with great people. Ask questions, and seek support. Rally around the community that really cares and loves you as much as Jesus loves you.
Thank you both. Thank you both for sharing on a challenging topic, and a thing that I think a lot of people have hesitancy to think through or process through, especially as you're still in the midst of it. And I think there's some real, I don't know, there's just a real lot of a genuine faith and care, and I just really appreciate both of you sharing both your journeys and just how the hard things impact faith and our relationship with God and our lives. And so thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Well, that was my conversation with Tim and Kelly, and I'm so grateful for both of them for just sharing on a difficult topic, for sharing with just real transparency about the things that they went through and are going through still. I would encourage you, listen to their advice, and if you're processing through whatever the emotions are with God, just be honest with him. Talk to him. Pray it through, and then find community that's able to have those conversations with, that's going to be able to support you through it. And don't be afraid to ask those trusted people to show up in a meaningful way in your life as you're going through something challenging, because it can really help provide the space to process and deal with it. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Ridge Podcast, and make sure that you like and subscribe so that you don't miss any helpful and hopeful conversations.